One choice, and everything changed. Are you ready for the truth? Ronit had always lived a quiet and simple life in the misty hills of Nainital. His days were spent between books, silent rooms, and the cold breeze that slipped through the windows during study nights. He rarely met new people, rarely went out, rarely talked much. Life was stable, peaceful, but empty in a way he never admitted. One evening, during his usual study hours, Ronit received a call from his friend Amit. Amit told him that his cousin Jay would be coming to Nainital for some days and needed a place to stay. Ronit wasn't very social, but he agreed. He didn't want Amit to feel bad. He only requested that Jay should not disturb his study routine. Ronit thought that this would be simple. Someone would sleep at his house at night, mind their own business, and leave after a few days. What he didn't know was that this stranger would slowly change the rhythm of his life. Jay reached Ronit's house earlier than expected. The door was open, so he stepped inside. The house was quiet, warm, and filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Jay wandered in until his eyes fell on Ronit, who was walking out of his room without a shirt, unaware that a stranger had entered. For a moment, both were startled. For a moment, the world paused. Ronit quickly disappeared into his room to change, his heart hammering from the awkwardness. Jay, meanwhile, looked around with curiosity. This house already felt strangely peaceful to him. When they finally sat together, Ronit noticed something different about Jay. Jay was energetic, disciplined, health-obsessed, loud in his opinions, and yet had a soft spark in his eyes. He immediately threw away Ronit's cup of milk coffee, claiming unhealthy things shouldn't exist near him. Ronit found him irritating, strange, unpredictable, but not boring. And that was new. Jay's presence brought movement into Ronit's silent house. Jay walked around confidently, even in his underwear, treating the place as if it were his own. Ronit scolded him again and again, but Jay simply smiled and said he had a habit of feeling at home wherever he went. Ronit didn't know why that sentence stayed in his mind longer than the others. Jay noticed things about Ronit that no one ever did. His loneliness, his self-doubt, his lack of confidence in his looks, and the way he hid his insecurities behind jokes. Jay gently pointed out that Ronit didn't appreciate himself enough. He tried to motivate him to exercise, eat healthy, and treat his body with respect. Ronit pretended to be annoyed, but deep down, he was touched. No one had cared this way before. Jay praised him sometimes, calling him handsome, telling him he deserved attention, making him blush without even trying. Jay had an effortless charm, the type that could melt walls without knocking. Ronit, who rarely let anyone in, felt something opening inside him. One evening, Jay noticed Ronit avoiding his gaze, lost in his thoughts. After some silence, Jay shared something deeply painful. He revealed that he was adopted, and that his biological mother had suffered terrible trauma. He himself was born from that tragedy, and he grew up feeling unwanted and confused about where he belonged. For the first time, Ronit saw Jay's vulnerability. His strong, cheerful exterior suddenly looked fragile. Ronit's heart softened in a way he didn't expect. He wanted to comfort him, hold him, protect him from every hurt he had ever experienced. And that scared him. Later that night, Jay quietly decided to leave the next morning, fearing he had overwhelmed Ronit with his presence. He didn't want to trouble him anymore. But when Ronit discovered Jay leaving, something broke inside him. He rushed outside, stopping Jay at the door. He didn't want him to go. He didn't understand why. But he didn't want the house to feel empty again. In that moment of confusion and trembling emotions, Ronit realized something he never thought possible. He felt peaceful, safe, and seen when Jay was around. Jay made him feel alive in ways he never experienced. Ronit broke down softly, unable to hold in the truth his heart had whispered for days. He cared for Jay. He didn't want him to leave. He had begun to love him. Jay didn't expect that confession. He was stunned, touched, and unsure of what it meant for them. But he hugged Ronit gently, a hug filled with warmth and reassurance, promising silently that he would never hurt him intentionally. Yet Jay left, needing time to think and breathe. A week passed. The house felt colder. The silence felt heavier. Ronit missed Jay more than he expected. One day, when Ronit was lost in his thoughts, the door creaked open. He assumed he had forgotten to close it again. But when he turned around, his heart stopped. Jay was standing there. He was supposed to be in Delhi. Instead, he had returned. Jay told him he had found a job in Nainital as a fitness trainer. Delhi had plenty of opportunities, but he chose the mountains. Ronit smiled sadly, claiming Jay only loved mountains. Jay stepped closer, looked into his eyes, and gently corrected him. He didn't come back for the mountains. He came back because someone special lived here. Ronit froze. His heart raced. His fears melted. Jay wasn't leaving anymore. Ronit tried to stop him, jokingly insisting Jay shouldn't stay because he would end up falling for him even more. Jay simply smiled and held his hand, telling him to let his heart fall freely. In that moment, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a home for two hearts that had quietly found each other. And with Jay's return, Ronit realized something beautiful. Some people enter your life unexpectedly and stay exactly where your heart always needed them. Jay's return changed everything. For the first time in years, Ronit felt the comfort of having someone in the house. Someone who understood him without demanding anything in return. The silence that once echoed loneliness now held a warmth he couldn't describe. But emotions are never simple, especially when two people are learning how to care for each other in their own ways. Jay became a part of the house as naturally as the morning light entering the windows. He started waking up early, exercising in the balcony while the breeze danced through the pine trees. Ronit often pretended to sleep longer, but secretly watched him from the crack of his door. Jay looked peaceful when he worked out, focused, calm, disciplined. Ronit didn't understand why his chest tightened every time he saw him like that. Jay, unaware of the gaze he attracted, sometimes teased Ronit unknowingly. He would walk out of the bathroom with wet hair, humming songs he didn't know the lyrics of. He'd drag Ronit to the kitchen and insist they cook breakfast together, even though Ronit barely knew how to hold a pan properly. Their days started blending into each other. Their breaths fell into the same rhythm. Their routines aligned as if they were always meant to be one. But with closeness came confusion. Ronit wasn't used to feeling so much. He wasn't used to having someone care about what he ate, how he slept, how tired he looked after hours of studying. Jay became a constant, a comfort Ronit didn't want to lose. And because of that, Ronit began overthinking everything. Was this friendship? Was this love? Was Jay on the same page? Or was Ronit reading too much into moments that weren't meant to be special? Every time Jay laughed at his jokes, Ronit felt butterflies. Every time Jay looked at him a second longer, he felt warmth spread inside his chest. Every time Jay said, "I'll be here," Ronit felt something deep and terrifying. One evening, Ronit was studying while Jay was scrolling through his phone nearby. Jay suddenly suggested that Ronit join him at the gym early in the morning. Ronit refused, saying exams were near and he needed every hour for preparation. Jay insisted gently, but Ronit snapped. He didn't mean to, but his fear, stress, and hidden emotions exploded at once. The words came out sharper than he intended. Jay fell silent. It was the first time Ronit had seen hurt in Jay's eyes. A quiet, painful hurt. Jay didn't argue back. He simply nodded, whispered that he understood, and left the room without another word. The silence that followed was heavier than any fight. Ronit's chest felt hollow. He didn't know why hurting Jay felt worse than failing exams. The next day, Jay woke up earlier than usual and left for the gym alone. For the first time since he returned, he didn't call Ronit for breakfast. He didn't make jokes. He didn't tease. He didn't invade Ronit's personal space like he always did. Ronit felt the distance immediately. It was like winter had suddenly settled inside the house. He tried to focus on his books, but every page blurred with worry. Jay had become a part of his life so silently that his absence felt louder than anything. That evening, Ronit found Jay standing outside in the cold, staring at the mountains. His shoulders looked tense, as if he was carrying something heavy. Ronit hesitated before walking closer, but he finally gathered the courage. He stood beside Jay, not saying anything. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken emotions. Jay didn't move, didn't look up, didn't speak. And then, softly, painfully, Ronit broke the silence. He apologized. Not for the argument, but for pushing Jay away when all Jay ever did was pull him toward a better version of himself. Jay listened quietly, and when Ronit admitted that he didn't know how to deal with the feelings Jay made him experience, Jay finally turned his head. There was softness in Jay's eyes, the same softness Ronit had fallen for. Jay didn't need explanations. He didn't need grand gestures. All he needed was the truth that Ronit whispered in a trembling voice, that losing Jay even for a day had hurt more than he could ever express. Jay didn't speak immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath and gently asked Ronit what he truly wanted. Not what he feared, not what he assumed, not what he thought was right, but what his heart wanted. And for the first time in his life, Ronit answered without running from his own feelings. He wanted Jay, not just as a guest, not just as a friend, not just as temporary company. He wanted Jay's presence, his laughter, his scoldings, his chaos, his warmth. He wanted him. Jay didn't move for a moment. Then a small, emotional smile appeared on his face. He stepped closer and whispered that he had returned not for convenience or mountains, but for Ronit. Something shifted between them that night. Something gentle, something real, something both had been waiting for silently. Jay didn't move back into the house because he felt comfortable. He moved in because he finally knew he belonged there. Ronit didn't let him sleep in the guest room anymore. Not because of romance, not because of intimacy, but because he wanted Jay close enough to hear his heartbeat at night. The heartbeat that had learned how to love because of him. They weren't sure what their relationship would be called. They weren't sure how the world would see them. But they knew one thing with complete certainty. Something beautiful had begun. Something worth staying for. Something worth fighting for. Something worth calling home. Ronit and Jay finally found a rhythm. Soft, unspoken, and fragile like early morning sunlight. They weren't rushing into labels or definitions. They weren't trying to explain the bond they shared. They simply existed together, learning each other's worlds. But every beautiful bond is tested, and theirs was tested sooner than either expected. As Ronit's exams got closer, the pressure increased. He studied late into the night, skipped meals, ignored sleep, and stressed over every little detail. Jay tried to support him, bringing snacks, forcing him to take breaks, cheering him up, but Ronit was slipping into anxiety. Jay understood stress, but what he didn't understand was Ronit's sudden habit of pulling away. Ronit started avoiding Jay's gaze, stopped joining him for morning tea, stopped smiling at his jokes, stopped responding with the same warmth. Jay felt it silently. He didn't say anything, but each passing day created a small distance between them. They still lived together, still spoke, still cared, but something was different. Ronit's heart was full, but his mind was a storm he couldn't control. One night, Ronit stared at Jay, who was sleeping peacefully on the other side of the room. Moonlight touched his face gently, making his expressions even softer. Ronit wondered something painful. What if I fail my exams? What if I'm not enough? What if Jay realizes I'm just an overthinking mess? What if one day he leaves? His own thoughts suffocated him. It wasn't Jay who created the fear. It was Ronit's own insecurity whispering lies into his heart. He turned away, unable to sleep, afraid to show how anxious he truly was. He thought Jay needed someone strong, someone confident, someone better. And Ronit wasn't sure he was any of that. Jay noticed everything. He noticed Ronit smiling less. He noticed how Ronit avoided conversations that used to last hours. He noticed how Ronit flinched whenever their hands brushed accidentally. He noticed how Ronit seemed to be protecting his heart, even from Jay. Jay didn't get angry. He didn't complain. But the hurt started building quietly. For the first time since he moved in, Jay began spending more time outside. At the gym, walking alone, training clients, wandering around town. Ronit didn't stop him. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how to. One afternoon, after a long study session, Ronit stepped out to get fresh air and unexpectedly saw Jay talking to someone outside. A girl from the gym. She laughed at something Jay said, touching his shoulder playfully. Jay didn't push her away. He simply smiled politely as he always did. But that small moment pierced Ronit deeply. Not because Jay did something wrong. Not because he was jealous in a dramatic way. But because his deepest fear whispered again. Maybe he deserves someone better. He didn't walk up to them. Didn't say anything. He quietly turned back inside, holding his breath. Jay entered a few minutes later and instantly sensed the tension in Ronit's eyes. Something finally snapped. Jay didn't speak at first. He sat down, took a deep breath, and looked at Ronit with softness and hurt mixed together. Ronit kept staring at the floor, unable to face him. Jay finally asked the question both were avoiding. "Why are you pushing me away?" Ronit froze. The words he had buried inside for weeks came rushing out. His fear of not being enough. His insecurities about the future. His belief that Jay deserved someone stronger. His anxiety about exams. And the fear of losing Jay. As Ronit confessed everything, his voice cracked. For the first time, Jay realized Ronit wasn't avoiding him because he didn't care. He was avoiding him because he cared too much. Jay stepped close, gently lifting Ronit's chin so their eyes met. He didn't scold him, didn't argue, didn't question his feelings. Instead, he said something Ronit wasn't prepared for. "You don't have to be perfect to be loved." Ronit broke down. All the walls he had built collapsed. All the fear he held alone melted away. Jay held him quietly. No loud promises, no dramatic words, just warmth. And in that silence, Ronit felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt safe again. Just when they thought things were settling, life tested them harder. Ronit received a letter from Delhi. His exam schedule had changed. He had to leave earlier than expected. For weeks, he and Jay had imagined traveling together. But now, Ronit had to leave within days, and Jay had commitments in Nainital he couldn't abandon. Neither wanted to say it. Neither wanted to break the moment. But the truth stood between them. They would be separated for the first time since their hearts found each other. Ronit felt fear returning. Jay felt the same sadness he once felt when he thought he'd lost Ronit. But this time, they didn't run away. They didn't hide. They didn't pretend. They held each other with quiet courage, knowing that love wasn't about staying side by side every day. Love was about staying connected, even when life pulled them apart. And their story was only beginning. Ronit lived a quiet life in the cool hills of Nainital. His world was made of books, silence, and small routines. He wasn't lonely by choice. Life had simply never offered him anything else. One evening, while studying, he received a call from his friend Amit. Amit requested a favor. His cousin Jay was coming to Nainital, and he needed a place to stay. Ronit agreed politely, not knowing that this one decision would change his life forever. The next night, Jay arrived earlier than expected. The main door was slightly open, so he stepped inside. The house was silent, warm, and filled with the faint aroma of coffee. When Jay entered, he almost bumped into Ronit, who had come out of his room without a shirt, unaware that a stranger had entered. In that awkward, surprising moment, something shifted. A new chapter quietly began. Jay apologized, smiled, and settled in with his luggage. Though the meeting was odd, Ronit couldn't deny one thing. The stranger had brought an unfamiliar warmth with him. Jay was full of life, discipline, and unexpected habits. He threw away Ronit's milk coffee, claiming it was unhealthy. He roamed around the house like he owned it. He teased Ronit, laughed freely, and made the silence in the house lighter. And without realizing it, Ronit started watching Jay's movements closely. The way he smiled, the way he casually walked around, the way he treated the house as if it was his own. At first, Ronit found him irritating, but soon he found comfort in those small annoyances. Jay noticed Ronit's insecurities early. His low confidence, his constant self-criticism, and the way he hid behind jokes. For the first time, someone saw through him without being told. Jay praised him, motivated him to take care of himself, and gently pushed him toward becoming better. And Ronit, who had never let anyone close, slowly started letting his guard down. Jay was becoming more than a guest. He was becoming a presence Ronit didn't want to lose. One evening, Jay opened up about his painful past. He confided that he was adopted, and his biological mother had suffered terrible trauma. He grew up fighting the feeling of belonging nowhere. Hearing Jay's vulnerability broke something inside Ronit. He realized how strong Jay truly was, how much he carried behind his smile. A strange warmth filled Ronit's heart. He wanted to protect Jay's softness. He wanted to be his comfort. But that same feeling frightened him. The next morning, Jay quietly packed his bag and decided to leave, thinking he had become a burden. When Ronit found out, his heart sank. He rushed outside and stopped Jay at the door, unable to hide his emotions anymore. For the first time, he admitted the truth. Jay's presence made his life feel peaceful, whole, and alive. He had started loving him without understanding how or when. Jay hugged him gently, promising that leaving him was the last thing he ever wanted. But Jay left anyway, needing time, and Ronit stood in the doorway, feeling a pain he had never known before. Days passed. Ronit missed Jay more than he thought possible. Even the tea tasted different. But one evening, the door creaked open again, and Ronit assumed he'd forgotten to close it. When he turned, Jay was standing there. Jay had returned to Nainital permanently after getting a job as a fitness trainer. He said it was because he loved the mountains. But his eyes told the real truth. He had returned because of Ronit. The reunion was soft, emotional, and filled with unspoken feelings. Life slowly returned to normal, the comfortable normal they shared together. But every relationship faces its test. As exam days came closer, Ronit's anxiety grew. He avoided sleep, skipped meals, and buried himself in books. And without meaning to, he began pulling away from Jay. Jay felt the distance immediately. The missed morning talks, the quiet dinners, the lack of eye contact, the tired expressions. Ronit wasn't avoiding Jay because he didn't care. He was avoiding him because he cared too much and feared losing him. But Jay interpreted the silence as rejection. Jay started spending more time outside, at the gym, with clients, on walks through the market. He wasn't angry, he was simply hurting, and Ronit didn't know how to pull him back. One afternoon, Ronit saw Jay talking to a girl outside the house. She was laughing, touching Jay's arm lightly. It wasn't romantic, but Ronit's heart clenched painfully. Not because of jealousy, but because his deepest fear whispered again. Maybe he deserves someone stronger, someone confident, someone not like me. When Jay entered the house, he instantly sensed Ronit's pain. He finally asked the question that had been building inside him. Why was Ronit pushing him away? The truth poured out of Ronit in trembling pieces. His fear of not being enough, his anxiety about exams, his insecurities, his worry that Jay would someday leave, and the overwhelming emotions he did not know how to handle. Jay realized Ronit wasn't rejecting him. He was scared of losing him. Jay gently touched his face and reminded him that love never asked for perfection. It only asked for honesty. Ronit broke down in Jay's arms, and Jay held him like he was holding something fragile and precious. Because he was. Just when everything felt stable, Ronit received an exam notice. His exam schedule had changed. He had to leave for Delhi earlier. Much earlier. Jay couldn't come with him. He had classes, clients, and a new job depending on him. For the first time since Jay returned, they faced real separation. Ronit feared distance. Jay feared losing the closeness they built. But both understood one thing. Love wasn't just about staying side by side. It was about trusting the bond even from miles away. They held each other that night, quietly, with no dramatic words, just the warmth of two hearts learning to stay connected even when life tried to pull them apart. Because their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning.